everyone, Ben Woodruff here with another Falconry video. Today's video I want to go over captive bred raptors versus raptors that come from the wild. I understand, of course, YouTube is a worldwide platform, and so I know there's people in many different countries who watch this video. Depending on where you live, there may be no regulations whatsoever, or all the way to the other extreme. And I also understand in some countries you can only have captive bred birds, and in some countries you can only have birds from the wild. That's your only option, and also everything in between. I live in Utah in the United States, so I'll be sharing a lot of that perspective, but it's still good to understand some of these principles regardless of what the options are in your country. Falconry, to understand it, we have to kind of go back into the best estimations of how it came to be. You think back in the old days, thousands of years ago, before we had farms, before we were agrarian, we didn't have farms, we didn't have big cities, we didn't have ranching. We hunted and we gathered. And the belief is that people saw falcons diving, chasing, and catching prey like bustards, grouse, pheasants, ducks, who knows, something along those lines. And that then when the falcon caught it, because a lot of times falcons will take prey heavier than themselves that they have to eat on the ground, they can't fly away with. So here they are mantling and eating their food, and people are like, wait a minute, I'm going to chase them off and steal that meal, and scare off the falcon, and then take whatever it caught. This is very normal predatory behavior. You see it all the time in nature, right? Where you'll see like a cheetah will catch a gazelle and then lions scare them off, or coyotes get chased off and they're killed by wolves. Wolves get chased off and they're killed by grizzly bears. It's very normal behavior. However, we believe that is probably the origins of falconry. That people were doing that and somebody got the bright idea, wait a minute, could you possibly keep, raise, and train a falcon to do that every day? To where it catches a grouse, we share it. Here, you have some, I have some. Next day, we do it again and again. That's probably, this is, most historians believe that something along those lines is probably how falconry came about. And it was probably with migrating saker falcons, although now there is some recent archaeological evidence that says that gyr falcons may have an origin on the other side of the world. But that's a different story. Suffice it to say, something along those lines happened where somebody saw the hunting prowess and abilities of a falcon, wanted to harness it and form a sort of a team that for mutually advantageous reasons. You both get a guaranteed meal, the bird gets protection, it gets a meal even if it misses, something along those lines. And that is why the first of the methods I'm talking about is so true to legitimate falconry. The idea of trapping a migrating falcon, or it could be another species, but trapping a migrating falcon, training it, flying it for maybe a season, and setting it free. How this evolved over time, we believe, is that by the time you're getting to agrarian times, you have farmers, for example, who they spend their spring plowing and sowing their fields, their summer raising and tending to it in the early fall, they're harvesting their crops, and then, yes, you have your crops, but now it's going to be a long, cold winter, and you don't have a lot of protein coming in, and you don't have a lot of stuff to do with your time. And so trapping a migrating falcon or hawk and training it to hunt the other migrating prey species that are also passing through is a great idea, because then you get more food for your family, and it was a subsistence way of living. It does make a lot of sense from that perspective. But then once you get into the spring, suddenly you don't have a lot of time. Your bird starts to mold. It's growing new feathers, so it's not hunting as well. It's getting warmer. The bird is less anxious to hunt. A lot of the prey species are migrating back to where they started for their breeding season, and you're busy growing crops. So why on earth are you investing time or feeding this bird that isn't bringing food in? Set it free, let it migrate back and start a family. That is kind of really the essence of falconry. Trapping a migrating bird, training it, hunting it with it for a few months, setting it free, and letting it migrate on back. Now that is not all falconry. There's all different kinds of falconry, of course, but that's the origins, and in my mind, still the heart and soul of what falconry is. I've had the chance to speak in another country as a guest speaker, and they were working to be able to have a legal wild take in this particular province. And we had wildlife officers come from their administrative service that administers their falconry laws. And they thought, oh, these people just want to be able to take all these birds from the wild. And I explained, no, that's not what it is. It's about the fact that falconry is trapping a bird, flying it for a season, and setting it free. That is the essence. Even if you never do it, it is an acknowledgement and validation of the sport by having that be a legal thing. And they were like, oh, the wildlife administrators were like, oh, we never thought about it that way. It's like, yeah, most of these people who have spent 10, 20 years flying captive bred birds in your province, that's still what they're going to fly. They might not trap wild one, but they want to fight for that right to have the sport acknowledged for what it truly is at its essence. Okay? So when we do this, when you're talking about trapping, we got to talk about kind of three different distinctions here. If you're new to the sport, you're learning about falconry, you need three terms: eyas, passage, and haggard. An eyas bird is a baby, like a baby in a nest. Okay? And regionally, people will define at what age you stop calling them an eyas, but it's a baby. A passage bird is a first-year bird that has first-year coloration, but is no longer under the care of the parent. So parents are completely out of the picture, and the babies are, huh? They're learning how to hunt, they're learning how to fly, maybe they're even migrating, but they're on their own. This is an important distinction because they don't have a mate. Most raptor species mate for life. A passage bird does not have a mate. Okay? A haggard bird is a bird that is older than 1 year old. In the case of eagles and some of the larger birds, maybe it's older than 5 because they're a little different. But for all practical purposes, a haggard bird is older than 1 year old. It has adult coloration, and it probably has a mate because they mate for life. We in the sport do not fly haggard birds, meaning we will not take a haggard bird from the wild, trap it, and train it. In the olden days, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, that was sometimes done, but we don't do that now. Where I live, it's the law, but it's also a law that we recommended to the government when the laws were being laid down, because it's ethical to not take an adult that might affect the breeding population. A first-year bird, a passage bird, has a 70 to 80% chance of dying, whether from starvation, killed by humans from electrocution, hit by a car, shot, killed by other predators, outcompeted, a million different things. So when you take a passage bird that has no mate and you fly it for a season or two and then release it back into the wild, you've helped it get past that first rough year, armed it with some guaranteed meals, and helped it to really grow and progress in its hunting abilities, and then you're setting it back free again. So that's part of the thinking and the methodology behind the trapping of a passage bird. So that first idea of a passage bird, before we get on to babies, that is the most glorious bird, a passage bird. Where did it come from? How did it get here? What region did it come from? Was it from a large family, a small family? How many close calls did it come? Does it have one feather that's busted up? What's the story behind that? Did some predator, larger bird of prey, something like that almost kill it? So it's really this mystery bird, but it has some hunting abilities because it's alive. It's away from its parents. It has some hunting abilities. It has some stamina. It knows how to steer, knows how to dive, knows how to fly. But it's still largely a blank canvas. It's a blank canvas with the fundamentals penciled in. And they don't know any different. And then if you trap a migrating bird and you train it, they're like, oh, hi, weird human. So you're the next stage of my life? Okay. And they train usually very quickly, very easily. They have learned hunger. Because when the parents first leave, they're like, what? So they understand that food is precious and that it's not a guarantee. And this allows you to very quickly form a bond with them and build trust. More importantly than a food bond, trust around food. Because remember, in nature, if you're a bird of prey, everyone and everything wants to kill you and take your food except for your mate or your parent temporarily. And then you come along and you're like, hey, I'll give you food. So for them, that's social bonding. The act of calmly accepting food, the act of food being offered, that is social bonding. So these passage trapped birds of prey typically train very quickly and do very well. And then when they're done, if you fly them for a season or two and set them free back into the wild, they do just fine. And they benefit from actually the experience. There's been tests done and birds banded that have been flown by a falconer for a year or two that are released and then found later to have nests. Statistically, their offspring have a higher survival rate than the regular wild ones, because we usually push the birds to be able to hunt a more diverse range of prey, so they're able to hunt more and provide better. So I think that's kind of neat. So that's the passage birds. That's trapping a passage bird. One of the benefits of this is that it's kind of cut and dry. But one of the bad things about this is you might not have those species in your area. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. Now we got to talk about the babies, the eyases. Pulling an eyas is very different. There's a lot of magic to it. Learning of species, learning its breeding habits, finding a nest, whether you're finding a Cooper's hawk nest dense in the forest and having to get out your binoculars and not bother the parents too much and watch the growth rate and know the proper age and time that you should pull a baby, or whether you find a prairie falcon nest and you scout all around the desert looking and finding and searching and looking for the signs until you finally find a nest, then keeping an eye on that, driving 1 billion miles, watching, learning, making sure that the time is right to pull a baby prairie falcon. Whatever it is an interesting stage. Training a bird from a baby is good and bad. The good thing is you have a guarantee. You're like, I would like to fly a prairie falcon. There is a prairie falcon nest. I picked it up. Here is the prairie falcon. That's very different than saying, hey, September, October, I'm heading out west and I'm hoping that I will find a passage prairie falcon. I'm hoping for a female and I'm hoping she'll train well. You see what I'm saying? It's like there's a lot of what ifs with a passage bird. And a lot of those what ifs go when you get an eyas, when you go directly to a nest. Where I'm from in the United States, it is against the law for an apprentice falconer, new falconer, to pull a baby. And the reason is imprinting a bird can go very poorly. They are 100% blank canvas, completely. And so whatever you fill in on that canvas, you could really screw them up, which could make them very aggressive. And remember, a passage bird, you can just set them free. They can be like, all right, hey, my life got too busy. I took on a new job. I'm fattening you up and setting you free. And they do fine. With an imprint, they might not be okay. They might go around trying to find a human as their mate. Or they might have weird, incorrect food aggression associations. They might go attack people in the wild. So it's a very serious thing to pull a baby bird of prey, an eyas, from a nest. And there is a lot of literature in it. I won't go into big details, but the age at which you pull matters as well. Falcons, almost any age, you can work through the problems and only have the positive, but they might be screamers. With hawks and eagles, any kind of hawk, whether it's a buteo, an accipiter, or an eagle, it gets really dangerous. If you raise them the slightest bit wrong, they could become very aggressive. And that's why with the ranks in America, where we have apprentice, general, master, you have to be a general or a master to fly and raise an imprinted eyas that you've pulled. So there's the good thing about them, though, is that because they're blank canvas, you can have them do anything you want. Kestrels, little tiny American kestrels. A passage kestrel will have hunted lots and lots of insects. Dragonflies, grasshoppers, crickets, things like that, butterflies even. And other than that, mostly mice. And now you are taking it and you're probably wanting to hunt sparrows and starlings. And they might be like, I'd rather hunt a mouse. Well, if you raise an imprint kestrel, then from day one of the hunting training, it can be like sparrow, starling, sparrow, starling. You can build them with little lures so they know, yes, I can catch a bird. And they have much more confidence, much more drive, and you just make them into the most perfect sparrow and starling hunting machine. Way easier to do that with an imprint kestrel than with a passage one. Same thing with prairie falcons. Prairie falcons, sometimes in the wild, they'll circle up and dive on prey, and sometimes they just kind of meander. A passage bird has those traits. It is much easier with an imprint prairie to teach them from the beginning. Hey, the style of flight I'm teaching you to do is circle up, I'll throw up some food or flush up some prey, you dive on it, and you get it. Okay, so that's the really good thing about it. There can also be some incredible friendliness with certain hawks and eagles and falcons that are imprinted. You have to be careful because the second season that can translate to aggression. So if you ever are pulling a baby, an eyas, it's always important that you know what you're doing, that you don't just think, oh, it's just like that hawk I trapped as a passage last year. It's a totally different bird. Doesn't matter if it's the same species. Talk to your mentors, talk to the people in your community who have flown imprints, and make sure you do it right, down to every detail, if that's where you are at. So, good things, they can be very social, you can make them into whatever you want. Bad thing is, there are enormous consequences if you do it incorrectly. So the last of the wild birds that I want to mention are what we call family birds. So remember, a passage, the parents are out of the picture, and they've been for weeks or months on their own. An eyas is a bird, hey, I'm still in the nest, or still on the cliff ledge, or wherever they're nesting. And totally dependent on mom and dad, and then you become mom and dad. The family bird is something special. There is this intermediate time where the bird's feathers are pretty much all the way grown in, but they are not yet hard penned. Hard penning is when the rich blood that was growing the feather longer and longer now retreats back into the body, the bird's blood pressure goes up, and the entire feather shaft hardens. Okay? So they're in the process of becoming hard penned, and they sleep in the nest at night, but in the day, they're jumping up and flying between branches, or flying out on the ledge, and they are competing with each other so that when whoever is the closest out on a branch, when mom and dad come, they may grab the food from mom and dad. And at that age, many birds will hamper prey. Like maybe you have a Cooper's hawk or goshawk that grabs a bird, maims it, but doesn't kill it, and flies near the nest, and the babies start flying after, and the parents drop it. So they're trying to catch it. So they're really training their offspring how to hunt. If at that age, you pull a bird at that age, they're glorious. They are amazing, especially with accipiters. If you have the opportunity to get a goshawk, Cooper's hawk, or sharp-shinned hawk at that age, oh, it's perfection. It's the best of both worlds, in my opinion. I do love flying passage accipiters too, goshawks, Cooper's hawks, but really the family bird, if you have a nest and you have the proper permits and your proper rank, that is my recommendation for an age. So all of those examples I gave are wild. Trapping the passage bird, that's totally passage away from the parents, pulling the baby, the eyas, at the right age and the right time, or the family bird, which is right, and it might only be, for a sharp-shinned hawk, that's maybe 4 days. For a Cooper's hawk, at best, week and a half. It's not a long period of time, but it's perfect. So those are those three for the wild that we normally see. Now with captive bred, it's a totally different world. Captive bred birds, some countries only allow captive bred birds. And in a lot of those countries, the mentality over time, whatever you're used to, becomes your normal. And if you're just used to it and it's normal, and then anything different seems outlandish or wrong. And I live in a country where we can trap, and I'm very grateful for that. Most of my birds are captive bred birds, but I'm still grateful for that fundamental privilege and right to practice the sport as it started, that I can trap a migrating bird, fly it for a season, and set it free. I think that's wonderful. So just so you know, I understand if you are in a country where it's not allowed and captive bred birds are the only species allowed, I get that this video may seem very strange, and you might be like, whoa, I think it's very strange that you would do that. Well, I understand, because that's what you're used to. Many of the countries where only captive bred birds are allowed, there's no permits required. And to me in America, that sounds nutty. I'm like, what? Anybody can just go buy an eagle? Are you kidding me? But that's how it is. Different countries, different regions. And I understand that. I'm just trying to share these different principles. Captive breeding of raptors. Falconry is the oldest field sport on the planet. It's ancient. Thousands and thousands of years old. At least 5,000 years old. Nothing comes close to that. And yet, captive breeding is less than 100 years old. In all that time, you didn't have legitimate captive breeding. Now, it is possible, and if you know of an instance, please, by all means, put it in the comments down below. I always love to learn new things. But as far as I'm aware, you go past 100 years, there's no verified, legitimate captive propagation of raptors. And really kind of the 60s and the 70s is when you really start to see it coming online. Falconers in different regions started doing that. But then in the United States and several other surrounding countries where they migrated through, peregrine falcons regionally became endangered. This is because of a pesticide called DDT that was sprayed on crops. Little bugs ate the crops and got poisoned. Little birds ate the dead bugs. Falcons ate the little birds. And that poison got in the falcon system, and it made their eggshells thin, and they wouldn't hatch. And so because of that, falconers who already had falcons in captivity possessed the only American population of peregrines that did not have that poison in their body. And so it was a very special opportunity to say, hey, falconers with these birds who are already starting to pioneer captive breeding, if we really push into this and really pioneer captive breeding, we can breed peregrines and release them into the wild that do not have the poison in their body, and then those eggshells will hatch. It was very successful, incredibly successful. Because of that, in August of 1999, the peregrine falcon in the United States was taken off the endangered species list. So thank you to everyone who worked so hard to do that. Thank you for those who campaigned and pushed to get DDT made illegal. And thank you to all the falconers out there and all you old timers who worked your tails off pioneering and captive breeding to get it to happen. Now, during that time, falconry laws became stricter and more highly regulated, more into focus in the United States. But meanwhile, this new idea of captive breeding really also flourished in the old world, especially in Europe, where many of the permitting laws were minimal to non-existent. So even though you see a lot of propagation starting out in the United States, it's really been mastered in Europe and in the Middle East. But now all over the world, people are doing raptor propagation. Why do it? There's a lot of reasons. I gave you the first one, right? Because peregrines show us the example. If you have a disease or a poison or something affect a wild population, then the captive population is a backup to save the species. We have this going on right now in Tasmania. The Tasmanian devils, amazing species. If you don't know what it is in your other country, Sarcophilus harrisi is the scientific name. It's an amazing marsupial predator, the largest marsupial predator left after the Ice Age. And there's this cancerous-inducing leprosy that's just ripping through the species. And they are convinced that the species in the wild is doomed to extinction. And so for years now, the government has been strategically pulling certain ones and breeding them in captivity to have a healthy, viable population that does not have this cancerous, contagious leprosy, so that when eventually the wild population is gone, that after careful surveys, that they can be reintroduced. They're already doing that right now, putting them on some islands off the mainland as well, isolated populations. So it's the same principle. That's one of the legal justifications why raptor propagation can be so helpful in an emergency. But for falconry purposes, some of the benefits are you have a guarantee of exactly what you want. Let's say you want a gyrfalcon. You can get a gyrfalcon. I live in Utah, and we occasionally get gyrfalcons in, but passing through in the wild. But even though we can legally trap them, finding one would be incredibly rare. So if you have the money, you can say, I will buy one from a breeder. You can arrange it ahead of time. You can plan your season based off of your quarry. You're not leaving it up to luck. There's a lot of species that you might not have in your area. Harris hawks, of course, are one of the biggies. Harris hawks are South America, Central America, Mexico, and barely into a few states in the United States. I don't have them in Utah. I can't trap one. So if I buy a captive bred one, I have a guarantee. If you live on the other side of the world, let's say you're in England or Russia, they certainly don't live there, and yet they're such a great falconry bird, so if you have breeders in your area, you can buy one. Merlins are the same way. It always amazes me that Merlins are captive bred, because all fall and winter, there are bajillions of them in Utah. They're easy to find, they're easy to trap, they're easy to train, and I love passage Merlins. I would never want an imprint if I could have a passage Merlin. They're such great hunters already. They just hit the ground running. But if you don't have Merlins in your area, well, then getting one from a breeder is a solution. One thing you got to remember this: listen to the breeder, listen to the falconers in the area, listen to your sponsor, especially because some of these birds, you need to understand the proper time to pull them. Harris hawks are a prime example. Remember, hawks and eagles, if you imprint them wrong, they are going to kill you. You don't want that. So listen to the breeder, listen to your mentors, and they'll tell you the proper age at which you buy from the breeder. I can't remember, but there's a certain week. Harris hawk breeders know that at this week, this is the week that you pull from a captive bred bird. And if you do it earlier, you're going to run into problems. And same thing with imprints. There's a lot that can be said about if you pull them too young, they might be screamers. So maybe let the parents feed for a big chunk of that time, and at the proper age you pull based off of your species. So I would love to talk more about raising imprints, and I'll do that in another video. But the main thing I want to do is just share the differences. Now, I know a lot of people seeing this, again, are from different parts of the world, and you're going to have different perspectives based off of the species in your area and also based off of what the laws are in your area. But I just wanted to outline the basics of understanding so that no matter where you live or what your preference is, that you're aware of these, especially if you're just getting into the sport. I myself have flown and continue to fly all of those scenarios. I trap passage birds and hunt them for a season and set them free. I trap family bird age diccipiters and fly them for a season and set them free. I will pull an eyas and keep it for years. And again, the bulk of my birds right now are captive bred birds that I purchased from breeders. So that's all okay. They all have their pluses and minuses, but just always listen to your sponsor, or listen to the falconers in your area, listen to the expertise of those who have already done this, and you'll make the best choice for you and your situation and your region. I hope this video is useful to you and interesting. Again, if you have more to add, please put it in the comments down below. I want these videos to be the opportunity for knowledge to get out there. So my knowledge is not the only knowledge, and it's not even the right knowledge. It's just my experience. So the more information that's out there, the better. Put your information down in the comments. That's great. Let me know other videos you would like to see. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. It does really help me build this channel. And as always, happy hawking.